Good to see you. Tell me what's new, what progress has happened over the last couple of weeks. Where
So
the
let's,
business stands.
everything is new.
Everything is new. Let's start by showing you.
Yeah, so we're working on a rebrand, rebranding the product from NeuroNet to
Excellent.
StepUp to Learning.
Excited to see this.
Yeah, so we're going for something a bit more. We're hoping to be more broadly accessible.
Focused on B2C, right? And
No, this is
B2B.
still the B2B offering. So
It is, okay.
it's the idea behind the rebrand is that StepUp is more directly tied to.
And that's a new name as
yeah,
well.
StepUp to motor skills and early learning. And we want to put this out there as a new brand and run some tests around pricing, and see if we can get some better insights around pricing without cannibalizing the existing business. So essentially, if we're going to test dramatic price changes, it's a way to do that in a low risk or lower risk environment.
But the focus is on the B2C, right? Because it's the call to action is shop now, and it's all about selling the.
So this is one of the hypotheses and one of the tests. We're unsure as to whether we can make the B2B market behave more like the B2C market. So there's a lot of evidence that in K2 this will likely not work, but there's also evidence that in pre-K that it may work. So we see competitors selling materials in the pre-K space where they are selling to institutions and it's an online store. Whereas in the K2 space, or which would be more broadly the K12 space, we see more of a request a quote, contact us for pricing.
But at least like what I see from the site is it is more of the shop now.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna our aim is to.
And so you have to make a pick, right? Like that was one of our conversations, and which is you have to go for the main one, which is exactly what you've done, which is the B2C, which it seems from especially
B2B. It's on the schools.
But if I go to shop now, the pricing of the products
is for schools.
Maybe it's the terms then that we're using of. What were there lower priced? So you are selling to schools, but it's the product that you can literally buy with a credit card versus the $10,000.
Well, that's one of the tests that we're going to run.
Yeah, we've lowered the price, and we're seeing if they would buy it with a credit card, because usually they wouldn't. But our hypothesis is that it could happen.
Got it. But either way, it's not like this long sales cycle, 10K sort of thing that you sell into a district or a school.
Well, if depending on what they purchase, these
could
be
right? But the first
$3,000,
transaction,
$4,000 transactions.
So if I do StepUp first, and I see you have it on Shopify, which is great, right? Because that allows you to just. We had talked about hosting it on. Like Unbounce or whatever, but that's fine. If this is an e-commerce platform, then that's the best way to do that.
Right.
And if I add to cart, anyway, I don't know. I still kind of see it as B2C in the sense that it's more kind of like self-serve without kind of a sales force.
That's the test. Like,
if it could, turn into something, a relationship where, hey, by the way, this is awesome. I used it, I'm a teacher or whatever. I'm an administrator. I used it for this particular use case. Now I want, enterprise pricing for the whole school. Right. That's cool, but it still kind of makes this more of a e-com kind of model.
Right.
Yeah, we're just hoping that lowers the barrier for the first purchase. And
exactly, and then it could, but then all of a sudden you have a much
wide.
higher, much more qualified lead that you're then kind of converting into something bigger.
We're seeing a couple things. So when we went and looked back at our marketing, the other thing that we're seeing.
Might have to plug in. You guys don't mind. Sorry, we can repeat that last sentence.
Running out of batteries, no problem.
Oh, that's streaming up for me. Okay. I was like, what does this mean?
You guys, this is your lingo though. You guys, right?
Plug in.
You're the ones with the cables.
You're doing batteries, man.
Oh yeah? Oh, maybe
We
you
charged
know.
those before we got here.
Do you mind if we push back a little? Do you mind?
Yes.
You do? Do you have, can I, log off of, yours?
Extension cord?
Yeah.
You can take this one.
Arthur's got the
That one's gonna be just as short.
Extension cord.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
perfect.
cool. That'll-
Sweet, thanks. Sorry guys.
No worries. You're problem solvers, right?
As long as it's not the primary job title.
I think that's the secret primary job title, but
It's the secret weapon. All right. Okay, cool. Sorry, so back to business.
So the other thing we're testing here is in the past, a lot of our lead gen activities have been more B2C focused in terms of generating leads organically off Facebook and
Blog, et
a
cetera.
blog and interest-driven stuff. Yet we're trying to sell, more in this B2B market. So one of the things that we're going to test here is to go straight to a list provider that has lists of people by title that work in schools that have the titles that we want to target, and test different problem solution narratives, bring them to this new website, and essentially see what happens.
Okay.
With those tests. In the event that email to website to transaction, in the event that test fails, it'll be reasonably easy to go back and then redesign the site to, email, request more information, email, request demo, and still have the e-commerce piece on there should they want to look up pricing. That way our sales team can be less about pricing and more about, hey, this user's been on the site, they've looked at pricing, why don't I reach out and see if I can engage with them.
And the test would be, where would you drive them? Would you drive them to fill out a demo form or actually drive them to the store?
So the first test is going to be the store, and then, if that fails, then we'll go back, up a level to demo.
To the store. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you also have to define like what failure is to get somebody to purchase a product for, $500, which is not an insignificant sum.
Right.
On the first email is a bit
right
difficult. So I think you just have to contextualize what success and failure is. Usually, when you're doing cold outreach, it's basically a mix of direct transactional, here, go here, purchase, buy, whatever it is. Typically paired with an incentive, I definitely consider that as something to give them motivation to do it, now. The next, week, it's going to be 20% off.
Right.
But, the likelihood, again, of that happening, it might not be necessarily that high because e-commerce, it's hard to get somebody to take their credit card out of their pocket and, spend, a significant amount of money, as you could probably say, given school budgets, on, short notice and hoping that they're, in that purchase mindset that they're actually thinking about something like this, right? Likelihood of that happening is not that high. That said, what you do is you pair kind of some of the direct stuff with more content-based stuff. So I then, think about this drip series where what you're really testing is this campaign, right? That ultimately the goal is to buy, but to help people get there, you're also providing them some sort of valuable information that helps improve their classroom and is directly tied to the product.
Right.
And I think about it probably not as just kind of the standard 3 email, drip, probably, somewhere on the order of maybe 5 or 6.
Right.
Where you're kind of peppering in, more of the transactional kind of buy now with content.
What? So, I mean, I feel like you're saying 5 or 6, but do you ever see nurturing campaigns? I mean, I see a lot of nurturing campaigns that go on indefinitely.
Yeah, and it could be.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm just
obviously
saying
you try
as
to
a start,
front load your strongest.
Yeah, and the inspiration behind that is classically, if it's something, let's say, let's have a conversation on the phone. I do like 3 emails that are, hey, let's talk.
Right.
Which is the, the direct transactional ones, and then I do, a bit, 2 or 3 of content, and then I'd kind of go back to the direct. So if after 3 they still haven't responded and they're not interested,
right.
Either they're too busy or they don't care,
right.
but give them something that would be valuable, keep them kind of engaged,
right.
so that maybe it takes a little bit more time to buy in and then reach out to them again. So anyway, that's the kind of inspiration behind the number, but start, I think, there.
Start there.
As like a realistic timeline of 3 to 4 days in between. Again, this will take a little bit of time too, so maybe you want to segment the list, if possible, to kind of run 2 sequential tests, because you also, timing is not on your side in terms of
right.
The length of the program and how much time you actually have to be able to evaluate this test fully. So to the extent that you can do another group that's more B2B focused, where even if the homepage isn't geared towards the what at least I'm calling kind of the B2B, you can still direct them to a page on the site that's more of a landing page style thing that
right.
talks about key value propositions, and it has kind of request a demo form where.
What about so what I suspect here, and I suspect that the email to store is going to fail if that were what we ran in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
But the benefit of having it there is, I think there's also a lot of resistance and annoyance in the space around companies that don't publish their pricing. Where people say, what a headache, like I don't want to go through the rigmarole of talking to a salesperson. But if this looks really interesting and I can see the pricing, then I might be more engaged because I know, hey, this is within reach, like why don't I talk to my administrator and see. So I feel like having in that nurturing campaign, shop now, even though it may be unrealistic, it puts the person in the buying frame of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then perhaps three days later, they have an opportunity to request a demo. And
yeah, I mean, you could do a mix. There's no, it's like part art, part science, in a
right.
sense, right? You've got to kind of try different hooks. It's, like you said, it might not be, purely, maybe like what you find is that people do need, somebody to kind of explain this product even before that $500 decision. And I think we had talked about this as well, that the best way, if the price point is there, you don't necessarily have sales resources to support that. So what you do is you aggregate demand in one place, which is a webinar.
Weekly webinar.
So I think, that could be, as you kind of set up this drip, prime them, make them aware, and maybe do 2 of those emails, and then kind of do the, do kind of pricing, maybe try a discount of sorts, or maybe you do the discount after. But like, let's say you do 2 direct emails, and you do the webinar, you push for that. Maybe there's some content, and some discounts afterwards. Whatever it is, like you'd have to kind of figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, get that. Do you have the lists today?
We don't have the list yet. We've been in touch with 2 different list providers about using their list.
Okay. users, and how quickly can you make a decision on that?
Well, we were essentially waiting until we had the emails ready and the site ready. They seem to be pretty able to move quickly.
Okay, cool.
You know,
I mean, the website, I mean, generally speaking, the website's, it's looking sharp. It's, I think, a big improvement. It's clean.
I'm sorry, can you just say the website's looking sharp again?
Someone slammed the door, something exploded out there.
The website.
Sorry.
So I think generally speaking, I really like the site. It's clean. It's more focused. I think it's simpler. It doesn't have those two navs, or maybe it was the vertical nav on the left. So I think you've made a lot of improvement over the last couple of weeks to make this feel like I think not only like a more focused business, but a place where you're actually transacting, more of an e-commerce site. So I think my only kind of small feedback is that maybe the contact and the login, I'd move those off more kind of to the right, because those are more kind of functional actions that people take. Whereas, most of the users here will be new, so your focus will really be on the store and I think the research. Those are kind of the two areas. Home is another thing that doesn't necessarily need to be there because most people are just used to clicking on the logo on the top.
Yeah, that's generally how I think about it. For our demographic,
they need it.
We're a little concerned.
Okay,
yeah.
then that's fine. So I think maybe kind of move these off to the right. I wouldn't put them in the same. The
Same
relationship
hierarchy.
is not the same between these two as it is between the content on the site.
Mhm.
So, cool. Okay. So that's good. How many people can you get on these lists? What's the numbers that you're looking at?
So we have different job titles. I think there are obviously more teachers out there than there are administrators. So we're looking at testing with administrators, testing with teachers, testing with subtypes of administrators, if we can get
Well, the
that
biggest
type
cut,
of granularity.
maybe you do two kind of, and maybe, the big cuts are administrators and teachers, so maybe what you do is you do two separate drips just because you might not want to put them all in one bucket.
Sure.
Where you're, both tailoring the message more to
Each.
their roles and who they are, but maybe you could tactically try different things that the administrator is not, necessarily somebody that you want to push to the store. Perhaps maybe it's more of that conversation, around doing this for teachers, whereas the teachers are so call that more of a B2B kind of flow, though you could maybe do some stuff about the store as well, and then the teachers are more about the B2C store, but you could kind of hook in elements of the B2B as well. But it seems like the content that you'd want to push out can't really be repurposed for both because they're very different like buying decisions. Does that sound accurate or not?
Yes and no.
Tell me.
I think to a large extent they may be unified in what they're looking for. I mean, teachers and administrators are interested in the research and the standards alignments. Teachers, I think teachers are also interested in kind of the multi-sensory nature of the program. I think administrators, though, would also be just as interested in that.
More so, I definitely think there are differences that we can play up in these, like the benefits of sort of overseeing progress on a teacher-by-teacher basis for the administrator is definitely something
True.
that we don't necessarily want to push to teachers, but would be a benefit for administrators.
But in terms of like the cadence and the call to action, how would that differ? Do you expect like either a teacher or an administrator to want to make a purchase? Like who would be putting in their credit card?
Typically, it's honestly, what's going to happen is nobody's going to put in their credit card. They're going to say, how do I submit a purchase order? And that's a link that we need to add to the store.
Okay.
So the shop now really is geared more to be like self-quoting tool in this B2B space than it is a transactional tool. Now that said, we may have.
Sorry, can you just say it is a transactional tool again?
Okay. The cart, in many cases, we expect to be more of a self-quoting tool than a transactional tool. That said, depending on the type of school, it may also be transactional. So, for instance, international schools, they may purchase with credit cards. Private preschools, for instance, may also purchase with credit cards. Whereas public K-12 schools, we would expect them to say, to figure out the pricing on the store, but then to send in a purchase order based on that.
Is that a button that you can add to the, instead of
to
like,
the store?
Yeah, add to cart, send me a purchase order or something like that.
Yeah.
Because you can maybe like facilitate, like if you know that that's already going to happen, then maybe
Absolutely.
like what you can do is just make it easier where, there's a pre-populated email, even if it's not high tech.
Sure.
Versus like, oh, I don't want to add to cart. All right, where's contact info? Okay, I've got to go to this page.
Sure.
Then, kind of do it that way. I don't know, just kind of thinking, again, make add to cart primary,
Right.
Big green button, and then, next button secondary, and
Need help,
it's
contact
basically
sales.
outlined in green and white, so it
Right.
doesn't capture your attention as
Right.
much, but it's there in kind of a secondary format.
That's absolutely what we're seeing. Competing companies do, even where they have a sophisticated store front where people can make credit card transactions. They also have
Cool.
readily available, engage with sales options built into the store.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's important.
Where am I? So, I lost my place here.
Do you have any thoughts on? We were in the middle of we were gonna relaunch our blog, the NeuroNet Learning blog, and that specifically it's more B2C. It's focused more on our therapist customers. Yeah, we want to use a lot of the content for this new page. What are your thoughts on sort of recycling the same content on here?
From the blog?
Yeah.
Essentially having, so there, the other, maybe to step back a little bit even further, a lot of the feedback that we got was that NeuroNet Learning sounds more like a special ed brand.
Yep.
And that StepUp sounds more
Yeah,
like
it's more
a gen
positive.
ed,
Mainstream, positive.
Yeah.
And then much more tied to the actual, like the physical.
The physical,
what do you call it? The kinesthetic
right.
activity.
So one thought is we have NeuroNet Learning, which is more of, is to just literally have two brands, have a special ed brand, have a gen ed brand, and keep both web properties, but to separate them to make sure the messaging is much more clear.
Because was the content more focused, I forget, was the business more focused on special ed before or not?
Well, it's both. It's a reasonably high proportion of sales. And potentially, rather than having two distinctly differentiated offerings for special ed and gen ed, we've ended up somewhere in the middle. And
Yeah.
that's also not ideal. So,
My thought is to like do more with like a sub brand, keep the master brand, and then step up for special ed, where you're maintaining that new identity, but you're just qualifying it for a particular audience, is going to be much easier to manage than two separate properties.
brands.
Because aside from practical things like what are you going to do? Have two separate emails that you manage, and two separate blogs and all this other stuff.
Right.
It becomes a huge mess, practically speaking, and then just conceptually, it's hard enough to kind of build an identity and a market for one property. Trying to do that for two, and then manage those is
That's
much more
great.
difficult. So I think keep that one. I like the positivity
Of StepUp.
of StepUp and the direct association with a key product facet, which is the kinesthetic learning, the fact that kids are actually doing things physically that you don't have from NeuroNet, which is more of this kind of cranial, less kind of physical and more
Brainy.
Yeah, not mental, but what do you
Yeah.
however you kind of describe that, thought kind of process thing versus action, like learning through action and physical involvement.
What are your thoughts because on the transition of one to the other? So for instance, we also don't have the luxury of just not selling over here while we figure out, the new brand.
Yeah. So I think notifying people, doing literally a 3-drip email, letting them know like NeuroNet is now StepUp, same company, lots of new stuff, new commitment, yada yada. Redirecting the old site to the new one, making sure that you have a banner just like for contact, us for a demo above that for a while that bridges the gap. So if I go to NeuroNet and it redirects me, the first thing I see is or maybe it's just contextual, only people will kind of redirect. You have either a banner or a pop-up that says, hey, welcome to StepUp, we've rebranded, etc. So all you need is a little bit of work to kind of join the two. And then there's some technical things like making sure that you get you pass through like the SEO juice that you've built up from the content,
Right.
to the new site, which I'm not an expert in that, but I know that that's something not to be taken lightly, because you have a certain stature that you've kind of built up and a certain authority,
Right.
right? In the posts that you've written, you don't want to lose that,
Right.
And there's probably some way of kind of managing that effectively, which some SEO people could specialists could help you with.
Right. But that transition, that's probably months.
Not necessarily. I don't know, like the blog stuff, yeah, that's going to take a little bit of work,
So we transition one. We still need to transition the other part of the site. Because this is the B2C. This is a B2B offering. We still need to put the BDC.
What do you see
offering.
as the B2C offering then?
Well, it's trainings for therapists. It's opportunities for parents to check out at a much lower price point than what's on here.
Okay.
And that also.
I mean, maybe it is kind of more involved than I thought, and maybe use this as kind of your testing ground for some of these the drip campaigns, etc.
Thinking about it.
Leave the other one for now. Like, don't screw anything up, but kind of deal with like essentially two properties.
For sure.
Got to jump, guys. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
But I mean, look, I think this is great progress. By next week, hopefully you have like the lists, and then I assume it's going to take a little bit of work, but either have kind of the drip plans ready and kind of written out, or have possibly even sent your first note, and then I can give you feedback on subsequent, or I'll give you feedback on the whole thing.
Okay.
But time to kind of put that into action and start really driving results and seeing like what would happen. Cool.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thank
Good to
you.
meet.
All right.
Good to see you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
And since you've are tied for participation, highest participation, I assume I'll see you next week. You're 5 for 5.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
What's that?
You and educators have both seen me 5 times.
Well,
Every time I've been here, so I assume you'll be back next week.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll
for
be back,
sure,
for sure.
for sure.
Cool.
For sure.
Always good to catch up.
High value stuff.
All
Really
right,
appreciate
take care.
it. Thanks a lot.
And